Hello, ladies and gents. In this particular episode in the CDN series, I'm going to talk about another CDN. This time, we are going to have a quick look around what Cloudflare offers and how it differs from some of the earlier CDNs that we have spoken about, the likes of AWS and Azure. For people who haven't seen my previous videos, I've spoken about some basic CDN concepts in the first part of the series. And then I've spoken about Azure and AWS and how to set up an endpoint in both these cloud vendors. So feel free to go back and have a look at those videos as well. If you like this video, please hit like, and if you want to be kept into the loop of all my latest upcoming videos, please do subscribe to my channel. So without further ado, let's jump into what Cloudflare is all about. So some quick facts to get you started, right? Cloudflare, is actually a reverse proxy. Now we've spoken about how any CDN acts as a reverse proxy. Some of the CDNs act as partial reverse proxies, whereas CloudFront is a really full-blown reverse proxy. And what that means is that you'll have to point, if you are trying to set up a web app from scratch, you'll have to point your domain name servers to CloudFront's domain name server. So, for example, if you've got your website hosted on GoDaddy, for example, or on any other hosting website, any other hosting platform, you'll have to point your domain name servers to CloudFront. This allows CloudFront to basically manage all of your traffic. So the outside world doesn't really see any traffic coming from your origin servers. It also uses Anycast as opposed to Unicast. So both AWS and Azure use Unicast. Cloudflare using Anycast gives it some really cool capabilities, which we're going to talk about in the coming slides. Before we actually jump off to the Cloudflare dashboard and start to set up an endpoint, I'm going to walk through these basic concepts quickly for people who are not really aware of what a reverse proxy is. And I'm also going to talk about Anycast and Unicast just very quickly to give a brief idea of how they change Cloudflare's behavior. And excuse this typo, this is supposed to be Cloudflare. One of the better things about Cloudflare is the number of POPs that it has globally. At the start of 2020, Cloudflare has around 194 POPs globally, which gives it a really good coverage around the world. So if you're setting up something that you think is going to be used across the world, this is something to consider really seriously, because at this point in time, AWS has around 150 POPs, whereas Azure has somewhere around less than 100. One of the other interesting things that I came across was that Cloudflare doesn't cache HTML by default, and it actually caches files using MIME type, which we'll talk about more once we're starting to set up a URL in Cloudflare. So, as I said before, jumping off to the dashboard, let's talk about these two quick concepts. And then we'll just go off to Cloudflare dashboard. So first up is reverse proxy, right? We have mentioned in the past a reverse proxy basically hides your origin server and serves traffic, and the outside world actually thinks your traffic is being served from somewhere else. So as an example, let's say this user device example.com requests traffic from the internet. That traffic hits your reverse proxy. Behind the scenes, reverse proxy would get the data from your various origin servers and then serve the data back to the internet and back to your user device, right? So to the outside world, the reverse proxy is actually the origin server. Now, how that helps is that imagine you've got a hacker, a malicious user who's trying to hit your origin servers. That malicious user uses a scanning tool to scan your hardware topography, right? All they'll find is a set of reverse proxy servers, right? They wouldn't be able to go beyond that, and in this aspect, Cloudflare would actually be the one that's going to get hit, and because of their infrastructure, they'll be able to quickly replicate servers or your data across multiple regions. And as we have said, they've got like 194 POP locations, so it's very easy to replicate all of that information across multiple POP locations. Next up is unicast and anycast. As we've mentioned, AWS and Azure both are using an anycast network topology, whereas Cloudflare uses anycast. What this means is, in a unicast setup, each machine is identified by a unique IP address. In anycast, each machine, there are multiple machines that have the same IP address. What that means, if end user, which is these red dots in the diagram, they make a request to an IP address, in the case of a unicast network, that has to go to a specific machine. And in case that machine is down, then traffic is lost. You can't get a response back. But in case of an anycast network, because multiple machines are called with the same IP address, so let's imagine all these green dots on the right-hand picture have got the same IP address called 192.168.0.10, for example. The request would actually propagate through multiple hops, multiple channels, and then end up at the origin server. What this means is that if any of these origin servers are down, traffic can still flow via a different path, right? Based on whatever the vendor uses as to gauge the shortest path. Generally, what algorithms are used are basically targeting the shortest path. So if whatever is the shortest path to get to the origin server, and if that path is down, the next shortest path is taken into account. So this is how anycast actually helps. So imagine if someone were to make a DDoS attack on one of the origin servers in a unicast network, everything goes down, and unfortunately you have to wait for the network to come up. In an anycast system, the traffic just starts to naturally propagate through the next shortest path available. So now that we have spoken about these two concepts, let's jump over to the Cloudflare dashboard, and let's get started with setting up an endpoint. Right, so when you log into to the Cloudflare dashboard, obviously you need to sign up. What I'm using is a free version. The paid version comes with lots of goodies, but generally what I felt is for sites such as your personal blogs, a free one would be really really good enough anyways. So I'm going to show you how to add a site first. So let's say I was setting up a new site called test.com. I'll just put in that site. And for people who haven't noticed me adding this site, it's on the right top hand corner. Once I've added my URL, I'll press on this add site button. The zone is banned, so I'll just come up with something else. Let's say I have my own website. Try again. It's not a registered domain. I'll give it another go and see if I've got one of my older ones. Cool. So once I've got a registered domain in, it will ask me what plan I want, and obviously, as I said, for most cases a free one would give you what you want, unless you are trying to set one up for an enterprise. So I'll select the free one. I'll confirm the plan, and then it will go back, try to scan the DNS records. It will come up with all of this information, and it will also ask you to basically add domain name servers. So basically at this stage, what it's saying is that you need to log into your your hosting server, and change the domain name servers to point to the Cloudflare domain name servers, which are listed over here. So you've got a set of set of steps on how to do that. This particular URL was hosted on GoDaddy, so that's what's listed over here. And once you've updated these settings, you'll do done, check name servers, and it'll go back and basically check whether the domain name servers are correct. Because I don't really want to set this up at this point in time, I've already set up one of my blogs on this. So let's go into this web into the site and see what we see once we've added the site. So imagine we were able to set up that site, and we come to the site. We see a lot of really nice information, nice graphics on how many visitors I've had. This, by the way, was supposed to be my personal blog. It's not active anymore, and you'll see a WordPress error if you try to visit this URL. But that's besides the fact, right? We are trying to assess what data we can actually see over here. For the purposes of CDN, there are a few options that are really important over here. We are going to talk about obviously caching. We are going to talk about page rules here, and we are going to also touch upon what these workers are, which is a really cool feature. Other than that, feel free to explore all of these other features. And as I've said, this Cloudflare actually gives you more than a CDN. It's a reverse proxy, and it gives you much more control, much more and many more features that we may not touch upon during this video series. So having said that, let's jump onto this caching part. As you scroll through this caching page, you'll notice that it doesn't really have a lot of options. And this is where it works really differently from an AWS or an Azure endpoint. Over here, these settings are very, very generic, and these settings usually apply across your website. So any setting that you want to apply across your website, that's what you put in over here, right? Let's say you already had something set up and you want to flush the cache. That's when you use this function, custom purge, or you purge everything, right? So let's say your website was working for 1 year or something. You've got stuff cached, you don't know how it's cached, or you just want to refresh all the caches you've got. You click on this purge everything, and it'll just reset all the caches across all the POPs, right? This caching level, again, generally, you've got 3 different options over here. And the details of these options are listed in the help section over here. But to give you, a bit of a diagrammatic explanation of what this is, let's go back to the slides again. So basically, as you saw, there were 3 different query string, 3 different options, right? In this graphic, you'll see that you're making 3 different calls. One is with version 1, the other one is with version 2, and the third one is without any query string. In this case, the only URL that serves up the data is going to be the last one, the third one, because we've selected the no query string option, right? Whenever there is a query string, it doesn't take that into account at all and wouldn't return any data, right? That's what query string is all about. The next one is obviously ignore query string. Whenever you make a URL request with a query string, it will return something, but it will return data that doesn't take the query string into consideration, right? So these are the 2 options here, and the standard one, the third one that's mentioned over here, is that it creates a unique cache entry for each URL. So it will treat url.com/version1 as one entry, url.com/version2 as another entry, and it will create one cache entry per your query string options, right? So it will cache a lot of data basically. So if you select standard, be mindful of the storage limits as well. So these are the three options you've got. Again, it's important to note that this is going to apply throughout the website. And I'm going to talk about how you'll actually modify your individual URLs in a bit as well. This third option is the browser cache TTL. Again, rather just keep it optional, unless just keep it default, unless you really want to tamper with it and you basically say, all right, you want to keep it really low. This basically tells the browser how much how long to store your data for. Again, a very generic statement. If you select 30 minutes, for example, it will all the browsers will basically request fresh version of that data every time they hit the origin server, or sorry, every time they hit Cloudflare. So it's very important to set this correct. Again, I'm not talking about respect existing headers just yet. This is because how Cloudflare actually operates is that it generally respects the origin server's headers, right? By default, if you were to come here and leave everything as default, right, Cloudflare still activates caching, but it will look at the individual responses to determine which response it has to cache how, right? There might be cases where you want certain responses to be cached for 1 hour as compared to other responses which you don't really want to cache at all, right? And if you're using Cloudflare, you can get into this confusion in how to actually manage these different URLs. So just to explain this concept a bit more, if we jump back to our slides and you look at this caching, the caching rules, right? Cloudflare honors this cache control response header that it gets back from the origin server. So as I said, if you set these default caching rules and make no further changes, Cloudflare would always look at this cache control and what's in there. So if something's got no cache in there, this flag, then it will and or a max age of 0, then it means that the origin server does not want Cloudflare to actually cache that request, cache that response. Sorry. If it's got something else, such as a max age of 50 or 1020 or some other number, then it will cache that response for that amount of time, right? And it will always respect that. Now let's say you want to override that in certain conditions. How do you actually override this behavior for certain URLs? Again, Cloudflare provides all this capability as well. For this, if you scroll up, and there are actually 3 ways of doing that, and in this video I'm going to show you only 2 ways of doing that, right? The first step and the easier one is the page rules, right? Over here you can go in and say, let's say I want to set up a specific rule for my index.html. Now my server is already returning a cache control saying you don't need to cache it, right? Serve it from the origin server. But I'm just just a rebel wanting to make a mess of what the origin server wants. So I'll just go in here and put in my URL that I want to change, and then I can make a change to the setting over here. Over here I can say that I want to let's say I want to always use HTTPS, right? Then it will always enforce HTTPS for this page rule. Let's say if I want to change the cache level, it will change I can change the specific cache level for this particular URL. I can say, all right, no query string, right? And this will override anything that has been set up in my generic settings, right? I can also, for example, go and change my origin cache control, right? And I can say, all right, I want the origin cache control to be turned on or off, right? So I can then add multiple settings as well. So it's not limited to one. I can add multiple other settings. I can set my TTL as well, right? And then I can do a save and deploy. Your URL should, all right, so I think it's complaining about lag of HTTP. Oops, missed an underscore. So miss a hyphen. So this way, I've been able to set up a specific page rule for this. Now, as you would have noticed, it comes up with this message saying you have 2 page rules left. On the free one, you can only create 2 page rules. Then based on the plan, I think the next plan, you can actually create 20 page rules, and then it keeps on increasing, right? The next way to actually modify any of these settings per endpoint is workers. And it's really cool how workers are set up. Now, workers are Cloudflare's version of serverless capability. What it allows you to do is run particular scripts in JavaScript on your edge server. So before an edge server actually serves up your data, it can actually run a script. You can call an API somewhere. You can probably do something like an increment a counter, or you can do a lot of other things, right? And I think that's a really cool feature. So if you to actually create a worker, you can use your launch editor over here, and it will come and give you a nice clean UI. You click on this add script on this side. You'll say worker for, give it a name, worker for demo, and then you come inside here. By default, it gives you some JavaScript code over here, and if you want to kind of run this code on a sample page, you can do that as well. At this point in time, all this code does is looks at the request and puts the request in the console. So as you notice, there's a nice little console here as well, much like a Chrome console. And then it also puts out a response. Over here, you can use any of the URLs to preview what you're getting in your response and request and response as well. In this code over here, as I said, you can actually call an API to just increment a counter somewhere, and then once you've got this set up, you can go and test it out as well. Now, as of today, early 2020, Cloudflare has actually recently just launched another UI for your workers as well, which again give you a really nice view. So once you've got your worker set up, you can then use that worker and add a route to that. So let's say I want to add a route, and I want to say that anytime someone calls index.html, I want this worker one that I had previously created to become active and run on the edge server. And once I do save, this route is actually hooked up to this worker. Every time this route is called, this worker is going to be called as well. So if I go in, I've already set this up. If I go into this, if I go into this worker again, which I'll go through this new worker dashboard that I was talking about, I can see this worker that I had previously set up. And as I said, this is a new UI that they've just launched as of this week. So over here, what this gives you is a nice URL as well, and a set of options. So you can use the get, post, put, patch, and delete options over here, and then make a call to this worker directly. So you don't need to test the worker out. You don't really need to hook it up to a URL. You can just test it without that. So once I do send, it will just call the worker. It will run the script on this side and give me what I want. So it takes a bit of time to come back with the response, because obviously that origin isn't really reachable, and it will pop everything in the console. Sorry. So if I go back again, I'll see that I've had 10 requests today, right? And if I were to just expand this and move the viewable region to the top, now this is my URL that I've set up for the worker. right? How do I actually know if I'm hitting this worker or not? So if I were to make a call to this URL and hit it a couple of times, right? And I've done a refresh of this URL, and I come back again and then try to refresh this page. See, I actually hit it 3 times, so it increased that counter by 3. So as you can see, I've got 100,000 requests for today, and by the way, 100,000 is the limit for the free account. If you go for a paid one, then this becomes unlimited. So this is how you can actually control anything, any of your caching behavior, and I find this really interesting. We had something similar in AWS, where you could actually attach a Lambda function, but this is something really good that Cloudflare's come up with as well. There's a slight difference between how workers work and how a real server or how another serverless serverless architecture would actually work, such as AWS Lambda or Azure Functions, but it's really minor, and I think Cloudflare has done a fantastic job. So with that, I think that we come to the end of this video. Again, as I said at the start, if you like the video, please do subscribe to the channel, and I'll keep on trying to find some really cool and neat stuff for next time. With that, thank you very much and enjoy your week.